All right, let's dive into something that is absolutely essential in software development, but most of the time, it's happening completely behind the scenes. We're talking about change control. We're going to see how a simple idea makes its way through a very specific process to become a real feature on your screen. I mean, think about it. You're using an app, you find a bug, or you have this brilliant idea for a new feature. You send it in, and then what? Does it just vanish into a black hole? Well, no. There's actually a structured, logical path it follows, and that's the path we're going to map out today. So, first things first, why do we even need a process like this? To put it simply, it's all about bringing some order to what could very easily become total chaos. And that right there, that's the fundamental truth of any software project. It doesn't matter if it's a new request from a user, a bug that pops up during testing, or even a big shift in business goals. Change is pretty much the only constant. So you can't stop it, you just have to get really good at managing it. It's a totally fair question, right? Why go through all this trouble? Why not just let the developers make changes whenever they need to? Well, if you try to take a shortcut, you usually end up in a mess that leads to some pretty serious headaches. Yeah, without a system, you're just asking for trouble. For starters, you've got developers accidentally overwriting each other's code. Then changes get so tangled up, it's almost impossible to undo one little mistake without breaking 10 other things. Nobody has a clear idea of the project's real status. And you open the door to all sorts of security risks. It's a recipe for disaster. Okay, so how do we avoid that disaster? You guessed it, with a clear, repeatable process. Let's take a look at the actual solution that brings sanity back to software development. And the goal here is really simple, but also really powerful: complete control. The point isn't to stop change, not at all. It's to understand every single request, to track every single modification, and to make sure nothing gets lost or, breaks the whole system. And here it is. This flowchart, this is our roadmap for the rest of this explainer. What we're going to do is follow one single change request, all the way from that first box at the top, step by step, down to the very last one. So let's start where it all begins. An idea is born, a problem is spotted, and a formal request is made. This is the first and maybe the most crucial phase, the analysis. It all kicks off right here. Someone, a user or a developer, sees a need for change, but instead of just yelling it across the room, they fill out a formal change request form. We'll just call it a CR. That simple act of writing it down is really the first step in taming that chaos we talked about. Okay, once that CR is officially in the system, the real work begins. A team is assigned to dig in and ask the tough questions, like, can we actually do this? What's it going to cost in time, in money, in people? They're not building anything yet. They're just figuring out just how big this challenge really is. So if we look back at our roadmap, you can see exactly where we are in the process. The change has been assessed and the costs have been estimated. This is such a critical point because now we have actual data. We've gone from just a vague idea to a concrete proposal with a price tag on it. Now that we have all this data, the request gets a priority level. Is this a super urgent bug fix that has to happen right now? Or is it more of a nice-to-have feature we can save for the next big release? This step makes sure that the most important work gets done first. All right, so we have a request that's been analyzed, costed, and prioritized. Now it's time for the moment of truth in this whole journey, the decision. We have arrived at the gatekeeper of our flowchart. All of that analysis, all that prep work, it all leads to this one single decision point. So who actually gets to make the call? Who says go or no go? Let me introduce you to the Change Control Board, or the CCB. This group, usually made up of team leads, project managers, and maybe some business stakeholders, is responsible for looking at all the data and deciding what happens next. They're the ones who weigh the costs against the benefits and make the final call for the good of the whole project. So the CCB really only has two options. If the request is rejected, that's it. The journey ends right here for this particular idea. But if it's approved, that request officially becomes part of the project plan. It gets the green light. And if we look at our roadmap one last time, you can see that approval moves us right into the final box. The change isn't just a request anymore. It's now an actual scheduled piece of work that's ready to be implemented.
Now, finally, the developers get their hands dirty. They get to write the code, they make the changes, they compile it, they test it to make sure nothing else broke, and then they hand it over for what's called user acceptance testing. This is where the request becomes a reality, but in a totally controlled, safe, and tested way.
And that's really what this whole thing is about. The process acts like a filter and a funnel. It takes in all these raw ideas and potential changes. It analyzes them carefully, and it turns the best ones into a real, functional, and stable part of the product, all while preventing that chaos we were so worried about at the beginning. So now you've seen the official journey, from a simple request to a functioning reality. But that leaves us with one final thought. Every step here serves a purpose, right? The evaluation, the costing, the prioritizing, the approval. What do you think is the single biggest danger a team faces if they decide to skip just one of those steps?